Hello, welcome to Predator Minute, the podcast where we break down the 1987 movie Predator 1 minute at a time. I am John.
And I am Aaron.
And we are starting off with Minute 1. Minute 1 of Predator begins with the 20th Century Fox logo and ends with just the speck of a spaceship beginning to appear in the inky black recesses of outer space. We're going to use this first episode to obviously talk about the first minute of Predator, but we also want to shed a little light on why we chose this movie to break down 1 minute at a time. What do you think, Aaron? Should we start with our own background, or should we start with the action of the movie?
Well, I'll talk a little bit about what brought me to this movie to talk a little bit more about. And that's the fact that from the first time I've seen this movie, really enjoyed it. And I've watched this movie many, many times, probably at least 20 times over the years. And it's the type of movie where I find that if I start watching it, it's really hard for me to stop. I feel like I have to keep watching it all the way through. So the majority of times I've seen it, it's been when I've been flipping around and seen it on basic cable and just decided that I have to watch it all the way through. And so because of that, I feel like I've ended up seeing a lot of different cuts and a lot of different aspects of the movie. It's one that I think is ripe for a lot of discussion.
More to the point than just, I would say, watching the movie. I would say over the years, you and I have had a habit of doing the easy thing of quoting the movie all the time. It just has so many good quotes, like the stick around, the subtler things like over here and anytime. But in fact, we even took a trip down to Puerto Vallarta a number of years ago on vacation, and that happened to be one of the principal locations for filming for Predator. And that was such a thrill to just kind of be in that area. In fact, we have somewhere, I think I have somewhere in my keepsake box, the picture that was taken of us where they superimposed their heads over a couple of buff Rambo / Arnold looking dudes in the jungle. And it was titled Jungle Team 2.
Jungle Team, that's right.
It's definitely a movie that's stuck around in our consciousness. I guess I can talk a little bit about the minute by minute format. Comes by way of the Star Wars Minute podcast, which was started, I believe, in 2013 with the 1977 film Star Wars, where Pete the Retailer and Alex Robinson started off breaking down the movie Star Wars 1 minute at a time. And as their following grew, they just naturally moved on into Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, and unfortunately the prequels. Sorry, Pete. But since their boom, a lot of different movies have gone that route of being broken down minute by minute.
Well, so I think Predator is interesting that way because Predator, I don't think is a great movie because of the big canon associated with it, although it definitely has one because of all the spin-offs and sequels that really never lived up to the original. I think the thing that makes Predator so great is because of sort of the concise nature of the original movie. It's a fairly short movie, and it doesn't spend a lot of time going into a lot of lore and backstory. It is really finely tuned and crafted for exactly the time frame that it's fit into, and really forms a great, I think, story start and finish, as opposed to expanding out into this larger universe.
That was something we talked about before recording today, was just how maybe at the time when the movie came out, it was seen as this really simple film, but you could say the same thing for a lot of really successful films that maybe even expanded into these expanded universes and franchises. They start so simple, but what the magic of movies is that it is hard to make something that simple from all these moving pieces, from the production to the locations to the actors to the director and so on and so forth. Other big movie franchises that were covered by the movies by minute format were the Indiana Jones trilogy, plus Crystal Skull eventually. Sorry, Tom, Jerry, and Pete. But there's also the Goodfellas minute, Princess Bride minute. Essentially, if you think of a popular movie franchise, it's likely that a Movies by Minute has been made about that movie. Not just the super popular movies, but there are also some of the more obscure movies, or movies you wouldn't think that would be popular for that format, such as A Talking Cat. If people are looking for a list of movies currently being covered by the Movies by Minute format, you can go to moviesbyminutes.com. And I don't think I mentioned that in the intro, but you and I are brothers. So not only do we have the shared love of Predator and Arnold and other things, 80s movies and action movies, but right, we just have that shared upbringing, that zeitgeist.
That's right. It makes some of these things loom larger than life.
Yeah, especially with the casting. And I guess we can kind of dive into the content of the movie with that. We start off with the logo, 20th Century Fox, one of the pillars, I guess you could say, of major motion picture studios. They've been around since 1935. They're really well known for, of all things, the Star Wars movies, alongside just about, I don't know, every other big movie you could imagine. Things like the X-Men movies, The Martian, recently The Revenant.
Big movies.
Yeah, big movies. And of course the Die Hard movies, which John McTiernan directed. Two of those, John McTiernan being the director for Predator. We can talk about his credit later on. So 20th Century Fox. What's interesting about this beginning, anybody watching from the beginning is going to right away notice what you and I noticed, which was we start off with 20th Century Fox and the fanfare and the logo, and we see deep space. You can't help but think of Star Wars 10 years earlier and the way it opens with 20th Century Fox, although leaving out, of course, the opening scroll, but the opening scroll will be kind of interesting for this movie.
Unnecessary. One of the reasons I love about this movie, you don't need a lot of backstory. There's not like an extensive mythology that is necessary for this movie. This movie get to the point quick, which I love. So they open with the producer credits, which is fine. The producer's always taking credit for what they put up on the screen. There's 3 action icons, and then immediately you were talking about the fact that this movie kind of loomed large in the zeitgeist of people our age growing up in the 80s. And the main reason, I think one of the main reasons why, is because of the star. In fact, it's the only acting credit that comes before the title of the movie. That's Arnold Schwarzenegger. So on the title, on the poster, as I recall, Schwarzenegger's name is just like in huge, big, bold letters across the top of it, Schwarzenegger, and then at the bottom it says Predator. And I think like many of the movies he starred in, that was exactly what the posters looked like. Schwarzenegger in huge letters. Anytime you saw that, you had a lot of expectations about what you were going to get, and certainly seeing that here against the big starry background with some already kind of dramatic music starting up is a pretty good sign that you're in for an action movie. Honestly, what's more important as far as whether you're deciding that this is going to be something you're going to watch or not, right? Are you going to decide based on the title of the movie? Like, oh, that's something I might watch. Or are you going to say Arnold Schwarzenegger? Well, am I going to go see Conan the Barbarian, for goodness sakes? Commando. Anyway, this is a guy he was a big box office name already at that point. People had high expectations for what they were going to get. So as soon as you see his name, you knew what you're looking for. It reminds me of it seemed like this was the case throughout a lot of the 80s and 90s, where whatever the headliner was would be like often the only thing you would know about the movie. So like I remember the Mission Impossible movies when they first started, all you saw was Tom Cruise's profile in shadow. Or like when Heat came out, all it said Pacino, De Niro, finally meeting, or something like that on the poster. No other explanation about what the movie was going to be about or anything like that. It was just that you knew who the leading actors were, and so you sort of had an expectation about what you were going to see based on that. And that was all you needed to know to decide on whether you wanted to see the movie or not.
And if you look at the poster for this movie, it's Arnold looking slightly to his left, holding his M16 with grenade attachment and just a giant, crosshairs looking right at his heart, and it just says Schwarzenegger in red on the top, Predator on the bottom, with the tagline, "Soon the hunt will begin." What I found interesting in doing a little bit of research was it wasn't called Predator in the beginning, it was called Hunter. And when I hear the name Hunter compared to Predator, I'm going to have to go with Predator as the more intimidating word, because Predator is very specific. Hunter, it could be someone's last name, like
or first name for that matter.
Or a first name, like many of Arnold's characters, of having just a super simple name, like a John, in this case, Dutch. But calling a movie Hunter, I think is a really good change to Predator.
Absolutely. I'm just looking through the posters of the Terminator, Total Recall, Commando. They all say Schwarzenegger in huge letters on the top. And then the title of the movie is down at the bottom. This movie's all about Arnold, and it definitely lives up to it.
I might be looking at the same thing, but if you go to that IMDb page where it lists his credits in order, the posters starting with Conan the Barbarian, then Terminator, Conan Destroyer, Commando, Red Sonja, Raw Deal, Predator. Each of them is basically just him holding a weapon on the poster with his name right at the top, above everything else. You're talking about larger than life earlier. Yeah, it's no larger than life than a guy who comes to America to realize his dreams of becoming an actor, becoming a politician, winning bodybuilding
Yeah.
competitions. He's still looming to this day as a figure, and who knows if he's going to take a leadership position later on, in politics.
It seems like he can do anything. He's just, yeah, just like you said. I mean, he's a megastar. He just shows up and he does whatever he wants. He wants to be Mr. Universe. He's Mr. Universe. He wants to be a Hollywood superstar. He's the biggest Hollywood star. He wants to become a politician. He gets elected to the highest office he can. He's just an incredibly huge name, and the fact that they opened the movie with it, I think, was a good idea. Because it really, I think it more than anything else they could possibly have shown on it, including like a scroll, like you were describing with Star Wars. That name embodies everything we need to know about going into this movie for the time period that it was in. This was before Junior, or before Twins, and before Kindergarten Cop. So I think there was that people at this point didn't expect there to be anything other than a gigantic action smash going on after this.
Looking at IMDb, just a year before Twins. Twins is out the next year, along with Red Heat.
Well, this was the same year as Running Man. I mean, he's pretty prolific then with the big action titles. If you had to decide your most quotable Arnold movie, what do you think it would be for him specifically?
For him specifically, I mean, so many of the Terminator lines.
Well, in like True Lies, where it seems like they kind of wrote the script with the idea being that he would have all these really memorable one-liners specifically for it. Even still, what I wanted to bring up is I feel like this might be his most quotable movie, even with all those others.
Yeah, I mean, the movie itself is really, I would say, sparse on the dialogue. There's really not that much, especially, once he loses his team, it's, he's not
No
saying
one to talk
much. And
to.
but everything he says is just,
Spoiler alert.
yeah. Spoiler alert for Predator if you haven't seen it, but he loses his crew somewhere along the way.
Arnold is one of the only survivors. Not even the Predator survives this movie. Talk about a spoiler. Oh man. So after Arnold shows up, we see this. You see the title, like you said, is originally Hunter. You get some dramatic play music for it, and then shortly afterwards, the title disappears, and you begin to see the speck of a spaceship. And this is definitely a blink and you miss it kind of opener. In fact, I think the first time I watched this movie, I actually didn't even see the beginning. I think I didn't actually see this first sequence until maybe the third or fourth time I saw this movie, and then all of a sudden I was like, oh, this is making a lot more sense.
Yeah, it definitely is a blink and you miss it. I mean, it's over by, I want to say, the middle of the second minute. It's not something I remembered seeing as a kid. But yeah, all I remember is, oh, he meets up with Dylan and they're off on their little adventure in the jungle. But yeah, it's definitely a blink and you miss it. And we can talk about this minute or we can talk about next minute. Do you think the movie needs this scene, this intro scene of Predator being dropped off?
No, well, that's a great question. It obviously doesn't need it. Like I said, I didn't even know the scene existed until I had seen it a couple times. But I think it's good foreshadowing if you're really paying attention. And in fact, that's something that I think goes throughout this whole movie. It's a very tight movie. Every single minute of this movie has this pretty significant meaning towards the whole storyline. And so if you are interested in paying super close attention, and we obviously are, then this is the kind of thing that will help foreshadow the whole movie to you, because you're not going to know why that's important for quite a ways into the movie. So you'll just be sort of carrying that in your back pocket throughout the first quarter or third of the movie before you realize why that shot at the beginning is important. But that's a good point that even without it, you still sort of get the idea of the storyline. It's not a mystery otherwise. I think the other thing that does help with those, that kind of helps with like the whole wider universe that people have created around Predator. So even though I personally am a bigger fan of just this 107-minute story, that scene does help sort of break out into some of the other lore that's laid out, like in Predator 2 and some of the other movies. So speaking of which, that speck of spacecraft that we can see in the distance there, I think you told me that you had looked up what the official name of that craft is.
Yes, this would be a scout ship, and we haven't seen what it's dropping off yet, so we don't know what's going to happen yet. We just, there's a spaceship in the distance. What's it doing? Maybe it's going to be outrunning, some kind of version of the Star Destroyer the Predators are escaping or something like that. Maybe they have some rebellion going on their own planet. They have to pick up their own. I don't know, Ben Kenobi or something like
Oh my
that.
gosh! See, this is the kind of thing that upsets me. See what that's ridiculous. Like, why do we need all that? Like, like in Jaws, did they go on like the backstory of Jaws? Like, oh Jaws, did your mom abuse you as a child? Is that why you're going around eating all the people on the beach? Like, we don't care. The aliens are there. They're doing battle with the biggest, baddest man on the planet, with Arnold. Like, what more do you need to know? Oh my
Just I
goodness!
want them to cut to the inside of the
The
spaceship
inside of the ship. Well, so that's one of the reasons why I get so annoyed at the rest of the Predator movies, right? Is so like in Predator 2, you see the inside of the ship, and I haven't actually seen Predators, the 2010 movie, and I watched part of one of the Alien vs Predator movies, but anyway, I think that it's explored a little more in some of those movies also. But regardless, like it's so unnecessary. Like it's got nothing to do with what you're there to see. What you're there to see is you're there to see this like epic struggle between like the biggest baddest people from different planets, right? And this is Arnold's chance to go from being like the titled Mr. Universe, right, from bodybuilding, to the actual toughest guy in the universe, to Mr. Universe, able to beat up everyone on multiple planets. And it doesn't matter like what he ate for breakfast in the morning, or where he grew up, or the long scroll about who they're related to and what planets they're visiting. Like, doesn't matter. They're there. They're doing battle. Anyway, I would have been very happy if they had never made a sequel to this movie. But that's all right. We're just dealing with this movie in this talking, so that's fine.
I don't know. I kind of like to think in another universe that Predator is trying to deliver a message to
to the rebellion. He's carrying like the plans for the Death Star.
And he's totally interrupted by this He-Man.
And then Arnold just comes out of nowhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Beats the crap out of him.
What I was reading about inspiration for this movie was that the screenwriters, the Thomases, I have to imagine they're brothers. What is it? John Thomas and Jim Thomas. I guess they took the joke going around after the Rocky movie saying, well, Rocky's beaten, everybody he can. He's gone from everyday underdog to taking on the whole Soviet Union and putting them on his back, and like all of a sudden
ending the Cold War.
Cold War. Exactly, with his fists. And so the joke was, well, he's fought everybody except an alien. I guess what I read on Wikipedia is that the screenwriters took that and just ran with it. Say, hey, let's take this He-Man character and pit him against an alien.
So then why didn't they cast Rocky then instead of Arnold?
That's a good point. Maybe someone saw.
Well, let me tell you why. Because Rocky is 5'8" and Arnold is 6'2", and Mr. Universe. That's the reason why. I remember having a very strong opinion about this when growing up in the 80s. That I thought, because Stallone and Arnold, they were like sort of unacknowledged rivals. They were each like the big action icons. In fact, there was an interview with Stallone on, like, I think Leno maybe, and he spent all this time talking about how much he hated Arnold back then because he saw him as his biggest like box office rival. And I had a strong opinion that Arnold was definitely like awesome, and Stallone was just this like dweeb who's like impersonating him, like wanted to be as good as him. And mostly just because like even though I love the Rocky movies, I was like he seems so less tough in those movies than Arnold does, because in the Rocky movies he's like playing the underdog, whereas Arnold always comes out just like immediately like crushing everything around him. In the words of Conan, he sees his enemies driven before him, hears the lamentations of their women. I was sided with Arnold in those. I think that's why he was the big bad guy, because he was definitely the more impressive physical presence,
right,
of the big action stars then.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. What strikes me in looking at the movies of that age, pretty clear that, yeah, they're thinking Rocky, but I think they're thinking way more of Rambo. First Blood Part 2 comes out in 1985, I believe, and they're saying, well, okay, Rambo can take on, a whole country full of gorillas, but can he take on an alien? Right, well, yeah, we know someone who can.
And here Arnold does both.
That's
exactly right. The special effects sequence there in the beginning I read was done by this studio DreamQuest Images. And they did some other big movies with much bigger kind of space effects. They did The Abyss and Total Recall. And so this was interesting that they just had this brief little spot to show off their space effects, and then it was later in other movies that they really got to flesh those out into bigger, more grandiose visions.
Right.
I guess that was different than the company that was responsible for doing all of the optical effects, but are not space based.
Yeah, that makes sense. They would use two different companies for that.
Right on. We get the first little bit of the score here by Alan Silvestri. kind of a big-time Hollywood composer. It opens with kind of that dramatic sound, right as the title of the movie displays. From what I understand, this was his first major action movie. So he'd done Back to the Future before and some other stuff, but this was the first time where I think he really focused on like the suspenseful, big noise kind of music, sort of set the tone of high adrenaline and tension that's kind of throughout the movie. What I was reading on Wikipedia was that they evidently released a remastered version of this soundtrack.
Oh, we're going to have to buy that.
Which is surprising for just like, just an instrumental track that from an action movie to have like a remastered part of the movie. But I guess it became really iconic and often copied kind of effects as far as, like I said, using the really loud percussion noises throughout to help build tension and drive the action.
This movie is, it's just rife with tension just from when they sat down in the jungle all the way through the end. And I would say the score definitely helps paint that picture. You're mentioning Back to the Future. If you go back a little bit further, you'll see Romancing the Stone. And those two movies are directed by Robert Zemeckis. And throughout the years, that's, Silvestri is Zemeckis's right-hand man there. He's directing, he's scoring everything that Zemeckis is directing.
Yeah.
And something I'm excited about next year, actually, which is Ready Player One, directed by Steven Spielberg. But it's for another day.
A lot of great adventure movies there.
Just go down the list. He's directing multiple movies per year that, people have heard of. Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Mac and Me, My Stepmother's an Alien. I don't know about those last two, but definitely Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And the year after, you have The Abyss, Back to the Future Part 2. The year after that, Back to the Future Part 3, Young Guns 2, Predator 2, showing up again for a Predator movie. Just go on and on and on and on. And movies everybody's heard of, The Bodyguard, Forrest Gump, Grumpy Old Men, Contact. Gosh, you have anything else to say for our first minute?
Looking forward to the rest of the movie.
Awesome. Anything in particular you're looking forward to?
Oh man, this whole movie, it keeps driving. Every piece just leads to the next scene, The music's driving it, the action's driving it, everything's nonstop. I love the fact that in this first minute we're sort of getting our first little introduction here to the first character, which we'll later find out is the Predator. And then the next scene introduces really all of the other relevant characters. And then after that, it's like, let's get in the jungle, baby.
So if that's everything, we'll bring this minute to a close. This has been Predator Minute. Join us next time for Minute 2. In the meantime, though,
stick around.
find us online at predatorminute.com and on Facebook at Predator Minute. Our music is provided by Chaosware.